They wheeled in the champagne like we had cured cancer. Confetti cannons exploded, shower of metallic silver paper raining down on polished concrete floors, and branded cupcakes sat in neat, depressing rows on the catering table. The plastic cups they served the champagne in were cheap, leaking slightly at the seams, and the branded cupcakes had thick frosting that stained everyone's fingers with corporate blue ink. The chief financial officer was crying in the corner, tears of joy streaming down his face as he stared at his phone, probably watching his personal bank account update with the initial wire transfer. I stood there, plastic flute of cheap sparkling wine in my hand, a tight, artificial smile stapled to my face while our baby was swallowed. The software product we had built from nothing was officially being devoured by a massive corporate python. It was a $312 million acquisition, a number that sounded impressive on paper, but felt like a surrender in my chest. We had built this company during sleepless weekends, working in drafty garages where the winter air made our fingers stiff, and in cramped server closets where the fan noise was deafening. Everyone around me clapped, their faces glowing with corporate enthusiasm. I tried not to scream. The new chief executive officer of the parent company, Julian Thorne, stepped up beside me. He was a man who looked like he practiced his empathy in front of a mirror every morning before work. He wrapped a heavy, condescending arm around my shoulder, pulled me close for a photographer, and announced to the room that I was the brilliant brain behind the brand. Julian delivered a long, winding speech filled with corporate vocabulary, using empty words like leverage, paradigm shifts, and disruptive trajectories. He managed to pronounce the name of our database architecture wrong twice in a span of 30 seconds, then handed me a branded polyester fleece jacket. It felt like a cheap prize, as if I had just been initiated into a college fraternity instead of selling my life work. Julian smiled, patting my back, and told me he was excited to have us on board for the next chapter of this journey. I nodded slowly, keeping my face expressionless, and made a silent mental note to start backing up our historical archives immediately. Here is the critical detail that Julian and his corporate board of directors did not comprehend. The founding team was not merely ornamental. We were not the quirky, eccentric geniuses to be paraded around for press releases and marketing materials. We were the beating heart, the original architects, and the system engineers who understood exactly why our legacy scripts had to sleep for 12 milliseconds before execution. If that script was altered, the entire transactional notification engine would suffer a massive database deadlock, halting thousands of client payments. They were acquiring a beautiful, massive corporate castle, but the drawbridge, the protective moat, and the master key remained in our possession. And deep within the labyrinth of the acquisition paperwork, hidden between lengthy non-compete clauses and complicated retention bonus schedules, was a single line of text. It was one specific clause that would eventually cost them their entire investment. The clause stated that if any original founder is terminated without cause, within 24 months of the acquisition date, all proprietary intellectual property and software licenses shall revert to the founding entity, effective immediately. That clause was not a standard template. It was born from 2 empty bottles of Pinot Noir. A very stubborn, highly experienced corporate attorney named Eleanor Riggs and myself. We sat in a dimly lit office at 2 in the morning, my eyes bloodshot and my brain exhausted, fighting like hell for the soul of the platform we had created. At the time, I was not anticipating outright betrayal from our buyers. I was simply expecting corporate laziness. It turns out that both betrayal and laziness would arrive in massive quantities. But before I proceed with this story of corporate treachery and technical warfare, I have a small favor to ask. If you have listened this far, please help me reach my goal of 10,000 subscribers. 97% of our listeners enjoy these stories every week, but never click the subscribe button. That is like showing up to a neighborhood barbecue with an empty plate and eating all the potato salad. One quick tap on the screen helps this channel keep running and allows me to keep sharing these tech stories. Anyway, the official press release read like a sacred wedding vow. It promised that together we would reach new heights, driven by a shared vision and unparalleled industry synergy. The daily reality, however, was far from synergetic. It consisted of 14-hour onboarding meetings where our new corporate overlords explained how to run our own company back to us, one bullet point at a time. They called this painful process system integration. We called it death by slide deck. Yet I played along. I smiled at the mandatory town halls, allowed them to rename our communication channels, and did not flinch when they assigned a junior project manager to shadow my daily work. They wanted to capture my institutional knowledge as if my mind was a simple document waiting to be downloaded. But I knew exactly how many months we had left on the contract. I knew the details of the clause. I knew they would never bother to read the actual terms, hidden as they were, behind 3 separate appendices and a mountain of dense legal footnotes. They truly believed they were purchasing a static machine. They had no idea they were slowly pulling the pin on a financial grenade. The consultants showed up like a bad rash, spreading fast and incredibly difficult to ignore. There were 3 of them at first, flown in from New York, with names that sounded like expensive, brand-name pharmaceuticals. Preston Brooks, Bennett Croft, and Carlton Finch. They did not build software, and they certainly did not write code. Instead, they optimized business processes, which in plain English meant turning productive engineering hours into endless, circular monologues. Carlton Finch was the quietest of the 3, constantly taking notes in a small black leather notebook, looking at developers over his glasses and sighing heavily whenever we tried to explain why a feature needed testing. They replaced technical intuition with arbitrary performance metrics that nobody actually valued. Their very first move was a complete alignment of our strategic vision. This involved 2 weeks of forced bonding exercises, trust falls, and slideshow presentations explaining how we needed to pivot toward corporate alignment. This was the same alignment that my engineering team and I had spent a decade perfecting without any corporate input. One particular slide actually featured a stock photo of a lighthouse, with the words "innovation anchored in agility" plastered over it like a motivational poster at a local dentist office. By week 3, our writing whiteboards were completely gone from the walls, replaced by collaborative innovation zones filled with modern, brightly colored beanbags that nobody wanted to sit on. They issued us new corporate laptops preloaded with tracking software that monitored our keyboard typing speed and flagged any idle time. The software was incredibly sensitive. If a developer stopped typing for more than 2 minutes, to draw a database diagram on a piece of paper, or think about a complex query, the system would immediately display a red warning light. It was as if creative problem-solving and system debugging could be measured in simple keystrokes, or as if they had any remote understanding of how long it took to design a self-healing database schema from scratch. Then came the middle managers, armed with clipboards and titles like Strategic Enablement Officer and Workflow Evangelist. I had a supervisor now, a man who wore loafers without socks and referred to me as old man in meetings. I am 54 years old, and I wrote the foundational lines of code he constantly mispronounced while trying to explain our features to a client. They began sidelining us, one department at a time. My co-founder and wife, Claire Vance, who had once presented our advanced data compression protocol at major tech conferences, was reassigned to user empathy research. In practice, this meant she spent her days creating fictional customer profiles for a young intern to review. Mercer, our co-founder and chief technology officer, had to justify every single code modification through project management tickets that took longer to write than the actual technical fixes. As for me, I was turned into a corporate mascot. They paraded me into high-stakes meetings with prospective investors, but they never allowed me to speak. "Let the numbers do the talking," Preston Brooks would say, right before he mangled our growth charts and credited our second quarter success to a marketing strategy, instead of the 2-week database migration I had completed over a holiday weekend. I used to argue. I used to correct their errors in meetings, fighting for technical accuracy and design integrity. But by week 6, I stopped. I let them talk. I let them rename our product roadmap the Success Spiral. I let them believe they were leading a complex platform they did not comprehend. It is always easier to let a foolish man walk into his own trap than to explain why the floor beneath him is about to collapse. I smiled, nodded, and even thanked them for their fresh perspectives. But Every time they bypassed our development protocols, I logged the incident. Every time they rewrote critical modules without consulting us, I archived the changes. They were digging a massive hole, and I had no intention of stopping them. I was frustrated, but I was not panicked. I was quiet, with the specific kind of quiet that precedes a pressure valve bursting. We had 16 months and change left, and the countdown had already begun. The consultants continued to push their new methodologies, replacing our quiet, focused environment with open-plan offices that echoed with buzzwords. They introduced daily stand-up meetings that lasted for 90 minutes, leaving us with barely any time to actually write code. Liam spent his nights reverted to fixing the integration errors created by their outsourced developers during the day. I watched the metrics drop, the response times climb, and the customer complaints begin to trickle in. The new leadership ignored all of these warning signs, attributing them to normal transition friction. They were convinced that their business strategies were superior to our engineering experience, and they were eager to prove that they did not need the original founders to maintain the system. They introduced a third-party virtual private network that slowed down local database environment queries by a factor of 10, rendering our test suites almost unusable. Liam pointed out this massive latency issue, but Bennett Croft dismissed the warning, stating that security compliance was far more valuable than engineering speed. I let them proceed, noting how this network change introduced a subtle race condition in the message broker. They were slowly dismantling the stability of the platform, piece by piece, and every single mistake was being logged and backed up on my external drive. The trap was set, and they were walking into it with wide, confident smiles, completely unaware of the legal and technical reality that was quietly waiting for them. It happened on a Tuesday morning, bright and sunny outside, but dead quiet in our executive conference room. Claire did not even receive a formal warning or a preparatory meeting. 1 minute, we were reviewing database logs from a weekend update. The next, her calendar invitations went entirely blank, and her communication profile picture turned into a gray cross. I recognized that specific shade of gray, the final logout indicator. She walked back to my desk 10 minutes later, a white envelope in her hands, her eyes filled with cold disappointment. There was no human resources representative, no executive manager, just a private security contractor standing 6 feet behind her, waiting for her to depart. The security contractor was a retired police officer named Pete, who looked highly uncomfortable and embarrassed by the entire situation, refusing to make eye contact with either of us. They told me my role was redundant, Claire whispered, placing the thin envelope on my desk. Redundant. She had designed the compression algorithm that was currently licensed to half of the enterprise clients in Asia. The severance package was thin, only 6 pages, and one of them was a strict non-disparagement agreement written in bold letters. Another page reminded her to exit the facility calmly without accessing any company networks, as if she were planning to destroy physical servers. Claire did not cry. She simply looked around the office space we had painted, wired, and practically lived in for years, and noted that she was the first to go. Before she walked out, she handed me a physical notebook filled with handwritten architecture diagrams from our first year, telling me to keep it safe. That was the moment the realization hit me. The clause, the one Eleanor Riggs had drafted, did not require all of us to be fired to trigger. It activated the moment any original founder was terminated without cause. Claire was out. That was the first lock broken. I did not run to the legal department. I did not call Eleanor immediately. I did not cause a scene in the hallway. I simply closed my laptop, reached into my desk drawer, and retrieved an old external hard drive. It was password protected and highly encrypted. I did not copy proprietary source code, as that would violate my employment agreement. Instead, I copied historical documentation, board meeting minutes, signed architecture blueprints, and old messages showing the early development timeline. This was absolute proof of our independent creation. They wanted to erase our history, but you cannot erase what has already been documented and backed up. I labeled the directory and encrypted the contents. Then I sat back and stared at the empty chair next to me. I was not sad. I felt protective of Claire, of our work, and of the years we had poured into this system. This was not a moment of grief. It was a strategic pause, the deep breath before the final movement. They believed they could dismantle our team piece by piece, unaware that some systems fail completely when you remove a single essential gear. The very next day, they introduced her replacement, a 27-year-old product manager named Brody Kincaid, who possessed a Stanford degree, a haircut sharp enough to cut paper, and the emotional range of a promotional website. He shook my hand and announced he was excited to absorb my knowledge. I realized they had replaced my wife with a kid who used technical buzzwords as punctuation. Within a week, I was quietly removed from all strategic decision meetings. No email, no explanation, just a sudden absence of invitations. But then Julian Thorne and Brody Kincaid made their biggest mistake. They realized that firing Claire had triggered the intellectual property reversion clause. Terrified of losing their entire platform, they summoned me to the boardroom. Julian slid a document across the table. It was a contract amendment dated 2 weeks prior, showing my signature. It stated that I had waived all rights to the intellectual property reversion on behalf of all founders. I stared at the signature. It was a clean forgery, a desperate attempt to cover their tracks. I did not say a word. I simply took a photo of the document with my phone, stood up, and walked out. I immediately sent the image to Eleanor. She called me back within 5 minutes, her voice sharp. "This is a clear violation of California Penal Code Section 470, Owen," she said. "It is forgery. Because it is built on a criminal act, this amendment is void ab initio, completely void from the beginning. The original contract stands, and they have just handed us the match to burn their house down." Eleanor explained that under California law, a forged contract carries severe penalties, and any subsequent transaction based on that forgery is legally non-existent. There would be no lengthy court battle over interpretation. The document was dead on arrival. The original acquisition contract remained fully active, and our position was stronger than ever. Julian Thorne's voice had trembled slightly during the boardroom meeting, and I could tell he was starting to panic, realizing they were out of options. The formal termination arrived 3 days later. They called it a strategic restructuring of the senior engineering leadership. It was delivered via automated calendar invite sent at 7 in the morning. When I arrived at the office, the conference room was prepared with off-boarding paperwork and a corporate water bottle. Brody Kincaid was absent. Instead, a human resources manager named Clara Winters handed me the documents, repeating corporate phrases about transition and growth. She looked nervous, her hands shaking slightly as she offered me a glass of water, admitting off the record that she was simply following orders from the executive board and felt terrible about how we were being treated. They did not mention the database failures or the fact that their latest release had dropped thousands of client transactions into a black hole. They simply wanted me gone. I read every line of the separation agreement, taking my time while Clara watched me nervously. I signed the paperwork, knowing that the forged waiver they held was legally non-existent, declared void ab initio under California Penal Code Section 470. My termination was the final trigger. The 24-month window was still active, and the immediate reversion of the intellectual property was now legally binding. I packed my belongings into a single backpack and walked out of the building, my keycard deactivated behind me. I stood on the sidewalk, took a deep breath of fresh air, and smiled. The countdown had officially begun. I walked down the street to a local diner where Claire and Liam were already waiting. The diner smelled of greasy bacon, burnt coffee, and old linoleum. We sat at a corner booth with a yellow table, and over cups of strong black coffee we shook hands, sealing our agreement to move forward with our new venture. Liam looked relieved, stating that he had felt like an automated robot under their micromanagement and was thrilled to write code in freedom once again. He recounted how his manager had asked him to explain the basic difference between a table and an index, highlighting the deep technical ignorance of our new leadership. Claire was already sketching new database layouts on a paper napkin. For the first 2 weeks, the parent company attempted to maintain a confident front. Julian Thorne posted updates on social media, bragging about removing legacy friction and accelerating product development. Brody Kincaid gave a presentation at a tech conference about scaling software platforms. I watched it all from my dining room table, drinking coffee while our cat slept on my lap. They deployed new features, but without Liam Mercer and myself, their engineering team had no understanding of the underlying system. They rolled out a visual interface update that broke the core database synchronization. Clients began experiencing errors. A major logistics partner reported that their shipments were failing to update in real time. The customer support team, now managed by junior staff, issued generic templates advising users to clear their browser cache. But the issues were not browser errors. They were structural failures. The automated scripts we had designed to prevent database corruption had been disabled during an agility sprint. Within 3 weeks, the support tickets had quadrupled. Internal communication channels were filled with panic. Engineers were searching for backup schemas and wondering why their access keys were failing to renew. The explanation was simple. Those systems no longer belonged to the parent company. The reversion clause reclaimed ownership of the entire database structure, the proprietary code, and the authentication layer. They were running their business on software. They no longer had a legal license to operate. I watched the decline in silence. Liam sent me a short message when their status page showed a major regional outage. They are still trying to dig, but they just realized the shovel is gone. The corporate executives called emergency meetings, begging their engineers to find a quick solution, but you cannot patch a system when the foundation has reverted to its original creators. I did not leak the contract to the media, nor did I contact their clients. Patience is the most effective element of a strategic recovery. I let them struggle in the dark, watching as they attempted to fix symptoms, while the entire architecture was slowly slipping away from their control. The corporate board was completely unaware of the legal reality. They believed their legal department could see us up in litigation for years. But Eleanor had already filed the reversion notice with the Federal Copyright Office. The documentation was airtight, and their forged waiver was a ticking legal liability that they could not defend in court. Every day they continued to run the system, they were committing willful infringement, increasing the potential damages. I let them build their own case, documenting every single instance of their unauthorized use of our platform. They were walking into a legal trap of their own creation, and there was no way out for them. Brody held a frantic team meeting, accusing the remaining junior developers of incompetence, while several of them secretly messaged me on my personal phone asking for advice on how to prevent a complete system collapse. The specific database issue was a race condition affecting a transaction ledger for a retail client with over 100,000 active daily users. Because their team had disabled our custom schema lock protocols, the sharded tables became completely desynchronized, causing massive data corruption. I remained silent, leaving their questions unanswered, knowing the damage was already done. The final collapse began when a frustrated junior developer leaked internal communications to a technology forum. The messages revealed absolute chaos within the engineering department, with managers frantically asking why they could not access the database backups or renew their security certificates. The leak spread rapidly. By the third day of the outage, the parent company's legal counsel finally reviewed the original acquisition contract. They found the reversion clause on page 58 of the third appendix. The terms were absolute. Upon the termination of any founder without cause, all intellectual property rights reverted immediately to our founding entity. There was no grace period, no arbitration, and no recourse. Julian Thorne's face must have turned pale when he realized the $312 million acquisition was now an empty shell. Their chief legal officer attempted to call Eleanor Riggs directly, threatening a multi-million-dollar lawsuit for trade secret theft and disruption. Eleanor calmly laughed on the call, reminding him that the forged waiver violated California Penal Code Section 470, rendering the document void ab initio. She pointed out that their company was currently operating our proprietary system without a legal license, which constituted willful copyright infringement. She advised him that if they did not shut down the servers within 24 hours, she would file a federal injunction to force a complete service shutdown. Their lawyers tried to contact me, My inbox was flooded with urgent messages offering to discuss transition agreements and licensing options. One email even suggested there had been a simple misunderstanding regarding the contract terms. I ignored every communication. My voicemail played a recorded message advising them to read the contracts they had signed. They did not realize that Claire, Liam, and I had already established a new Delaware limited liability company 2 months prior to my termination. We had named it Lantern. We were not interested in returning to save their sinking ship. We had already built a cleaner, more efficient version of our software, completely free of corporate bloat and middle management red tape. We worked from a small loft above a local coffee roastery, enjoying the quiet productivity. We painted the brick walls ourselves, set up our own server racks using second-hand hardware, and enjoyed the smell of freshly roasted coffee beans drifting up from below. We bought 3 refurbished office chairs and hung a wooden sign near the entrance that read, Lantern. Software built by humans. Our meetings lasted for 5 minutes, focusing only on technical milestones. Our old clients began reaching out to us, searching for stability after weeks of system failures. They did not want corporate synergy. They wanted software that functioned. We migrated our first major client, the logistics partner, over a single weekend without a single error. Their chief technology officer sent us a large gift basket of gourmet food and a thank you note saying it was wonderful to have the adults back in charge. We onboarded 11 clients in our first month and 34 in the second. We did not have to advertise. The parent company's failure was our best marketing campaign. A prominent technology journalist named Timothy Grant published a detailed article on Wired titled, Fortune 500 Giant Loses Core Platform After Firing Founders. The report exposed the entire situation, including the forged waiver that had been declared void ab initio under California Penal Code Section 470. The parent company's stock price collapsed, their pending public offering was withdrawn, and Julian Thorne was forced to resign. Julian's LinkedIn profile was deleted, and Brody Kincaid had to disable comments on his social media accounts because of the overwhelming mockery from the developer community. I watched the news report on a small television in our new office. I did not celebrate. I simply turned off the screen and went back to work. We had not set out for revenge, we had simply enforced the contract. We built a system that belonged to us, and we watched it succeed. The office was quiet, save for the sound of keys tapping and the distant hum of the coffee roastery below. It was the same quiet focus that we had lost during the acquisition, but now it was ours to keep. Liam was working on a new optimization module. Claire was reviewing user feedback from our beta testers, and I was writing the foundational schema for our next database update. There were no consultants, no open plan distractions, and no corporate tracking software. We were building something sustainable, something built on trust and technical integrity rather than buzzwords and false promises. We hired back 2 senior developers who had been laid off during the restructuring, and they were thrilled to be writing code instead of updating Jira tickets. We celebrated our first profitable month with pizza and cold drinks in the loft, laughing about the corporate meetings we had escaped. The parent company had tried to buy our creation, but they had forgotten that the value was never in the code itself. The value was in the minds of the people who built it, and that was something they could never own. Thank you for watching, you dedicated professionals. Click that subscribe button to join our community. And if you happen to be my former supervisor, I suggest you read your agreements next time. The founders always remember the fine print.